Okay, welcome back. We're opening our third talk this afternoon. We are very, very happy to have Professor Frank Ruschitzka, Phyllida Barlow, and Finn Canonica on stage now for the last talk. I will hand over immediately to Finn Canonica. I will not have to introduce him very much. He's the editor-in-chief of Das Magazin. Everybody knows that, I guess. And that means I'm going to just let them start with their talk without losing any more time.
All right. So thank you for being here to this third talk of this afternoon. My name is Finn Canonica. I'm the editor of Das Magazin. The guests today are two extraordinary personalities. I would like to introduce you first to Phyllida Barlow. Phyllida Barlow is one of the greatest living British artists. She's a sculptor. Well, that wasn't a personal opinion. So she's a sculptor. She's famous for her monumental sculptures made of quite humble materials. Like she will show a lot of them later, like timber, offcuts, cement, foam. She's an Emerita professor of fine arts at the Slade School of Art, and she represented Great Britain at the Venice Biennale in 2017. And I still remember when I saw your work at the British Pavilion. I felt like it was fascinating to be intimidated by the sheer size of your enormous sculptures, but at the same time, it gave you also kind of a feeling of being sitting in a nest, being protected. So it's scary and intimate at the same time. There was something that I will never forget. Then to her right is Professor Dr. Frank Ruschitzka. He's a top scientist and practitioner. Frank, I will call you Frank. He's a cardiologist, a professor for cardiology at the Zurich University Hospital. He won numerous awards in his discipline. I don't have the time to mention them all. His team at the University Hospital did some fantastic research and some breakthrough discoveries in the field of cardiology. When I spoke to Frank a couple of days, the first time in his office, it was really an interesting experience. He immediately started to talk about the heart, how great the heart is, our heart, that we should be grateful to have a heart that works. He then mentioned that death by heart failure is still a very common death. And then I was just to leave, he gave me this little thing, which actually it is a heart. And he said, well, take it with you and you can play with it for a couple of days and really look at it and study it. And you sent me home basically saying I should love and pay more respect to my own heart. This is something I've been trying to do the last couple of hours. And we'll start with the presentation by Phyllida, and then comes your presentation, and then I will pass that through the audience. Maybe you can just have a look at the heart. You can stick it together. Don't break it. I think it's quite worth something. So, Phyllida, start with your presentation.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here and lovely to be back in Zurich. It's such a fabulous city after the hell of London. Post-Trump. Sorry.
Best visitor ever.
Yeah. I've got far too many images, badly organized. I'm going to begin with what I consider to be at the heart of my activity, which is really not about image. It's not so much about the visual experience as the sentient experience. And it begins with small works, where touch is the dominant driving force of how I make these small works. This is also in relationship to drawing, so I begin a lot of works with small works and a lot of drawings. That's a drawing from the 1960s, 70s, 90s. And I will just show 5 works that have made a huge impression on me. Louise Bourgeois' Untitled from 1958, this great mass of plaster which has engraved in it her own finger marks, which gives this material which comes as a powder, you add water and then it sets. It gives it this great sense of it being in the present tense. It's about a work that's continually in the now, and this great rolling form is in a way kind of inchoate. It's very sort of anti-form, as well as being a massive formal presence that's about 5 foot high. A hand from El Castillo caves, they're actually 30,000 years old. Just the evidence of human life represented by the hand that endures. And to me, making the hand have this extraordinary ability to do so much that is in a way not about verbal language, it's about something else. It's about touch, it's about making, it's about evidence. And Eva Hesse's fantastic Contingent, which is just these materials dipped into, again, liquid to solid materials, almost nothing, but in a way completely interfering with our passage through the space, taking over a space that we might be in, and somehow equaling us, forcing us to have a relationship with these incredibly fragile materials. Then Picasso's Glass of Absinthe, which to me heralds the whole beginning of modern sculpture. A sculpture which is painted, it's bronze. He made 11 of these, where the interior and the exterior twist round each other so that you almost can't read what is shadow, what is surface, what is a convex form and what is a concave form. It constantly teases you about its presence, and it's only about that high. Then the extraordinary Matta Clark slice in the building down on the Hudson Wharf, where now, if you know, in New York, they've completely taken these building downs, and you've got these extraordinary high-rise pencil-type skyscrapers there. But the action that Matta Clark used to cut into these buildings is something I just continually envy, where the action is the work, and that is something which I find really important. I'm going to whiz through these work. This is at the Tate in, where is it in? Tate in London, in UK, sorry, and taking over this kind of very long space in the Duveen galleries, which are very sort of revered. And I wanted to fit something in them that was a bit like a square peg in a round hole, something that contradicted the architecture. Maybe it's a sort of childish relationship I have with sculpture to make it sort of not conform with the space that it inhabits, to take it on. Maybe it's a sort of a kind of rebellious streak, and you were talking about this earlier, of wanting to challenge authority. And I think it is childish, because I'm biting the hand that feeds me by doing that. But at the same time, I'm also interested in sculpture as a very sort of recalcitrant, rebellious art form that takes over spaces and intervenes and interrupts our relationship with how we negotiate a space. So this work traveled the whole way down these Duveen galleries, interfering with our passage through them. And I hope gave the audience the ability to be very much choreographed within the work, so that they would be involved as much as the work itself. So for me, there's always 3 protagonists. There's the space, the sculpture, and the audience. And it's how those 3 protagonists interact that fascinates me about making these large installations. More drawings. I draw the whole time. It's absolutely an essential way for me of working through ways of being able to translate that into making. This is 100 drawings. I've got a book at home which is called Modern Sculpture that was published in 1958. And it's like the big bad book of hideous sculpture. But I absolutely love it because it's incredibly old-fashioned modernist sculpture, the sort of thing that's in a way quite out of fashion in some respects. But I think the kind of belief in it is very tender. It's very, in a way, very loving. And what I think it also reflects is an enormous sense of history. A lot of this work that I've then copied in a very rough, graphic way is very much about the post-war years in Europe, where you get that tremendous sense of some enormous tragedy having happened, and that what we're looking at is the kind of remnants and the evidence of that. I think it's powerful. And small works, again, very important for me in preparing for the bigger works. And yes, somebody in the audience knows this work quite well. And this is here, and this is another way I work. This is the Kunsthalle here, where I quite like the idea of the half-finished work. So all the works that travel through these 3 galleries of the Kunsthalle, wherever it is it upstairs or through there, were all the rule that I sort of made for myself was that the works would never be complete. They were all, in a way, in a state of suspension. Again, for me, the syntax of sculpture fascinates me. Is it in the present tense, the future tense, or the past tense? What's its temporal qualities, as well as what's its kind of relationship with gravity? Gravity is a material. And so, for me, this work in the lower floor of the Kunsthalle was like a kind of game or a shadow of the work that went upstairs, which was this work, which was a big stage that led to these holes in the wall through which the reconstruction of the gallery upstairs were going on. So the lower gallery was really a kind of shadow play of this rebuilding of the space upstairs. And then this final work, which is the Venice work, very, very difficult challenge at a time when the UK was going through the Brexit nightmare and still is. I mean, it must seem like complete idiocy to all of you, and it is. You know? I'm not responsible for it in any way, but to then be representing a country that was going through this meltdown was actually very difficult. And my desire was then to kind of cram this pavilion, which sits in this very colonial position, which in itself is very problematic, and allow the work to explode out of it, which is what I felt was the imminent journey of the Brexit saga. So in a way, this was a big metaphorical statement of both using the space as a kind of theatrical space, echoing a lot of the colors of Venice with these huge colored walls onto which these, in a way, these parodies of objects would be hung. So this is a balcony. And then I'm very interested in the interiors of sculptures, what's supporting them, and trying to expose that. So there's both the terrible lying and fibbing and pretending that sculpture does, and then its kind of truth when you actually see what's holding it all up and making it stand, or in my case, quite often fall, and then having another attempt to make it all stand up. I'm just going through these very quickly. Small works again, these are more recent. This is last November, very important for me to working out how I want to tackle bigger works or just keep them as smaller works and more drawings. I think that the pretense of sculpture fascinates me and the theatricality of it. What is it? I mean, sculpture is useless, it's pointless, but I am passionate about it. I love that fact that in a world where we attempt to rationalize everything, there's still the opportunity to renege on that and make things that are functionless and are, in a way, I hope for me, just themselves. And so this is at the Royal Academy, using the whole space. The images make them look like Toy Town, but they're actually about 4 or 5 meters high. And again, for me, it was incredibly important with this show that there was this sense of choreography between the space, the objects, the sculptures in the space, and how the audience would walk through. The title of this show is Cul-de-sac because it's 3 galleries queued up, so you can only walk one way and then you can only walk out again. So you have this very definite 2 views of the work, which was very much its intention. Balance, precariousness, a sense of the half-built, the slightly unfinished, all these aspects of everyday life fascinate me, not only physically and in their terms of their making, but maybe metaphorically as well. I'm just going to go through these. There, finished. How long did that take?
12 minutes. Very good. Take every time.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we follow with Frank's presentation.
Well, what a wonderful talk that was. Could there be a better ambassador for the UK and staying in the EU? We allowed to say that because we are also not part of it. So why don't you join forces with us in Switzerland then?
Okay.
So,
good idea. I'll take that home.
So it's wonderful listening to you, but makes me wonder, I'm just here, a small boy, a cardiologist, a heart doctor. No, what stays from me? From you, all this wonderful artwork. An architect can show around and say, well, I built that or that with the help of my people. What can I say? I'm not quite sure. I think some patients of mine should be in the room because I've been working 30 years in this city. So wherever I go, and we are a small city, I know them. Every now and then it's handy when a policeman or someone like that is your patient that helps you. But the good thing is I know as a heart doctor who has a good heart. You certainly do, and who has a strong heart. And but I became a heart doctor by chance a bit. I wanted to become a doctor because I'm the son of a pediatric nurse who my mother kind of instilled that enthusiasm for medicine in me. And we had a lot of doctors in the family, but she actually went to med school when her mother died, and she took care of her disabled brother who was suffering from polio at the time and never went back to med school. And then she said, and she had that enthusiasm for me, and I felt like I was not born to be a doctor, but I got that passion from her, I have to say. She's gone a long time ago, but she always taught me, very strict lady in a way, a pediatric nurse at that time. They were different, and she wanted to always know why. She's taught, by the way, food is medicine. She always said that. And you have to understand everything. But at that time, and I went a lot to hospitals with her and stuff, so I was scared, to be honest. And I became, I think, when you're a pediatric nurse and see your son, that you feel like you're an hypochondriac because you see what can happen to you. I grew up with that. So all my life, actually, I'm to this day, ask my nurses in the hospital, they've taken ECG from me and taken blood from me, I don't know how many times. So at one time, when I was a student, I saw that movie. You remember that one? The Seventh Seal by Ingmar Bergman? Who has seen that? Well, I love that movie. It scared me to death. It was set in Sweden in the medieval time, and that, well, a very handsome knight women like him. He meets the personification of death. And he meets him and asks him, who are you? And he says, I'm death. And are you coming for me? I've already walked by your side for a long time. Are you ready? And that's something he answers, which I tell my patient, I hear from my patients a lot. My body is ready, but I am not. And then he invites him to play a game of chess. And who wins? And you know the movie. And that's how we feel as doctors, when you're smart enough to come up with a strategy. And thanks to science, we've got a little army in front of us, some officers which I can play and help my patients and get some years for him, but not also, and add also some quality of life to it. And that's what we're doing. And I, believe it or not, I think about that actually a lot. And that's what drives me. And I don't want to scare you, and I actually have some German headlines in that because I think most of us can read German here. But in Europe, and England is still part of it, we have 4 million people who die a cardiovascular death. Everybody is scared of cancer, but you all die of heart disease. That's the definition of death. Every one of you. And that's it. And actually, it's more women that die of heart disease than men. And more than 500,000 per year in Europe die before the age of 65. They pay in the pension fund, nobody tells them, but they won't get it. And that's the same true in Switzerland, because here we all think, everyone, when you're in science, it applies to Europe, but you also want to have a Swiss answer. It's 22,000 people in our country that die of heart disease every year. Imagine. More than 100,000 are hospitalized. That second, I just came out of the hospital. I think we have 20 on the emergency room, 20 heart patients right now as we speak. They come in because when it's warm or too cold, then they come and they flood in. And half of them die, just to let you know, the first time that they learn that they have a heart when they drop dead. So those of us who come to see a cardiologist finally may actually survive a little bit longer and live better. Some may have a blood pressure problem every now and then, right?
Yeah, all right.
All right. She told me before. And that's a good thing. So, cardiologists are usually not very charismatic or smart people, but they're good to have around. So that's good. And they can take good care of you. So what does it have to do with science? So what drove me in science, and it's in no way that I want to compare myself to a superstar artist like Phyllida, but what drove me was I want to get an answer. I want to answer the question of why. And actually, believe it or not, we in cardiology consider one of the most famous artists of all time as one of our godfathers. It was actually Leonardo da Vinci, who, at the time, Phyllida, think about that, when you were an artist, you were allowed in the Tuscany to do some anatomy experiments and do some dissection of some corpses, if you were an artist. Well, and that's what he did. And he had this meticulous drawing of the heart. And at the time, Galen had taught the world at the time that the center of the pulsation is the liver. And it was Leonardo da Vinci, actually, with all meticulous drawing of the heart valves, that it's introduced a cardiocentric view in medicine. He himself. And he wrote at the time, the heart is a muscle which contracts spontaneously. And in the Trump times of these days, there was also, he was not allowed to say everything. I could tell more. He wrote, by the way, as you see there, from right to left. You could only read it with a mirror. I could tell you more if I was only allowed to do so. He wasn't at the time. The church was after him. And that is how we moved on. When you look at the beautiful picture on the right, this is the way how we see a heart. We can now have a look at a heart without opening the chest. If you ever had a hand, it's a few things in life that scare you more than having a heart in your hand. It's interesting, actually. It's an interesting feel. We should give that around that. But that's the way we look at that. The cardiovascular imaging we have, that's what an image you can get of your heart in our hospital if you want to. It's in the center. It's Remistrasse 100. Drop by, say you want that, you get that. And what it teaches you, Phyllida, is a bit respect. Your heart, my heart, pumps 100,000 times a day. That's roughly, when your number is up, 3 billion heartbeats through your life. So be careful. Invest them carefully and wisely. And be gentle with your heart. Take care. That's it. And it's roughly 300 grams in interest of time. But here's the thing what we should do, but we can now help you. When death comes to visit you, we can buy you some time. We have some strategies. And this is actually a young man, 53. See, Finn, he's younger than the two of us.
Shut up.
Shut up. And I'm not sure you can see that, but that is what we do here every day in our clinic. We just did it right now in several patients on Saturday. You see the red arrow there. There is a second, I probably can stop it, which you see where the black spaghetti has a stop, where it's white. That's what we call a widowmaker. If you don't intervene there, he would have dropped dead in a week or two if he hadn't had a smart cardiologist who had sent them to us. And when you look at that, you see that blockage there where it's white, and then we put a balloon in here on the right side, and I think that's one. The 10 seconds a day we feel like an artist. When we put a little wire in that and then a balloon, blow that up, and all of a sudden, this patient has a new life again. And he most likely will be 92 and a half. And that's when the guarantee expires and the fun zone begins. So we will do that. And actually, we're very proud because in our country, we are the cradle of what we call interventional cardiology. That is made in Zurich. In our hospital at the University Hospital in 1977. Andreas Grünzig did that first. He was totally crazy. Everybody thought, putting a wire in the heart, are you out of your mind? Probably he was. But he heard voices others couldn't hear and see what others couldn't. And he played with it, and he did it. The first patient he did in Zurich lived 35 years after that. And he would have died within a year. So that is something. Our patients are a little bit our artwork. You don't see it after that, but makes us happy. When we go through the city, we see that. And that makes us proud. That's a little impact we have on patients' life that makes us happy. That's very gratifying. And now we can even put valves in the heart without opening the chest. We do that every day. Patients get a new valve and go home in 2 days. That is something incomprehensible 20, 30 years ago, that we could do this. Coming to an end soon, but that's the way it was then. 100 years ago, when you would go on ward round, and I love that. My joy is talking to the patients and being there. I just came out of there. I was on ward round just the hour before I came here. But that's how they did in the past. And all they had was, Phyllida, they would listen to your chest and then see whether they could hear some heart sounds or something like that. We got a bit better. I like actually in that picture, the guy on the very right, he looks like working on an iPhone or something. Oh, yeah. That's the same back then. So, but you know how we do it now? And that is, for me, I'm not an artist at all, but it looks beautiful. But you know what it does? And the very corner up there, this is a life-threatening disease. We had to operate them within a day, otherwise he would have died. Because there's the leakage up there on the right top, which you probably now hear. You see this here, that shouldn't be the case, there. And that is a leakage. Within a day he would have been dead. He's still alive, years after. And the same here. It looks quite colorful, quite pretty. We're not artists, But that's actually a life-threatening disease, and we could cure that by diagnosing it early. I don't want to bore you with all of that. But a little bit coming to an end, what we are doing in research at the moment is to look as and as you, when I listen to you, you put your heart and soul into what you're doing. I think it's the same. I think the soul is in the heart, personally. But that's a cardiologist's view of the world. And that is actually a beautiful and a very sad story. And that is a patient who died. And that was a 28-year-old patient who fell and was dying and was becoming an organ donor. And he was evaluated for donating his lungs and his kidneys and his liver. And then we looked at the heart and said, oh, the heart actually doesn't pump that well. When you look at here, it doesn't really pump. It looks here, you see, it doesn't pump. And they said, oh, we can't take that heart. And you know what? We took that heart that looks as if it's not pumping and gave it to someone who was waiting with a heart that was even worse than that, because that heart was healthy. And why was that? That heart was broken for a day. We call it the so-called broken heart syndrome. So the brain and the heart, they work together. So when you are kind of terrified or have some overridden by emotion, it can stun your heart for a day. And in that patient who had a severe head injury, the brain was firing on the heart and the heart was stunned. But when you take the heart out and transplant into another patient, it works beautifully. So we call it the so-called broken heart syndrome. And that is particularly the case. It looks like a heart attack, but it goes away. It's very often in patients who lost a spouse in bereavement. Or, love hurts. That's what it is. It can break your heart. And what's very interesting is this heart-brain interaction that we're working on, that happy emotions can do the thing. We actually, together, Jelena Gadri and Kristen Templin in my group, they are the leaders on that. They coined a term called the happy heart syndrome. Because in evolution, the brain and the heart couldn't distinguish between bad feelings and good feelings. And even good emotions can stun your heart, can literally break your heart for a day or two. It can be life-threatening. And we call it the Diagoras syndrome because that was the father of 2 Olympic gold medal winners in old Athens. He was said, now that my son won an Olympic gold medal too, I can die on the spot. I'm so happy. And he did. So we called it the Diagoras syndrome. Just coming to an end in the end, this was a patient of mine who came to us and said, we need a heart transplant in him because everything we can do for him has failed. And then what did we do? We put, the dilated heart on the left, which is like this and doesn't really pump. And the same patient, the heart is much smaller, it's more relaxed and pumps much better, it looks more lively here on the right. That looks much better than that one here, which is bigger and this is smaller. And and that is probably the few things that stay from me in my life, that we in personalized medicine were able to show that whether your ECG looks like this or whether like this, more narrow, it explains whether you will benefit from a certain pacemaker or not. These were a couple of million people who have already gotten that therapy and can live years longer and better with that. That's probably one of the few things that stay one day if I crash from an airplane, and that we had an impact on other people's life. And I want to come to an end with a word that in medicine is for me very important. We are working a lot now along the lines of personalized medicine. That means we want to individualize. Not everything is good for everybody. And Eugen Bleuler coined the term schizophrenia. At the time, it was called dementia praecox. We call that Trump's disease these days. But and in a time, he was fighting with Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud had a theory for everything. And he said, no, Sigmund, you're wrong. Your opinion that all or nothing is good for religious communities or in politics. But in science, it's harmful. We have to be more granular. We have to individualize. We have to personalize. And that's what we are doing, and we learn from him. So we are now putting machines in patients. I don't skip that in the interest of time, but want to end with that picture. That's actually a patient of mine whom we transplanted. And I told him I was never at the Matterhorn in my life. Although I'm in Switzerland for more than 25 years. And he said, well, I send you a picture when I get heart transplant, and I go up there. And that's him. And he got that. And that is the little artwork that stays from us. Yeah. And his wife was more happy than him, because for them it's very tough going through a transplant of your spouse, for all the suffering on the way there. But he's fine ever since. And with that, I want to conclude with, I started with Leonardo. That is a way, and that's how I would like to say, that's how we stupid doctors look at Mona Lisa. Actually, my friend Mandeep Mehra, he's my counterpart on the Harvard clinic. He's the director there, he's a very good friend, and he's a visiting professor in my clinic as well. We had a congress in Paris last year, 2 years ago, and he said, Frank, have you been to the Louvre, to the Mona Lisa? And I said, haven't been there in 30 years, but have you looked at her, actually? I said, yeah, well, what's the deal? I said, do you know that she has hypothyroidism, so the malfunction of the thyroid? I said, why would you say that? And if you look closely, that was the Leonardo da Vinci. She has this little splinter here. That's a cholesterol deposit. You see that here. She has a lipoma. She has hypercholesterolemia. She has, when you look at, my thyroid, here she has an enlarged thyroid, and she has a yellowish tone because of the carotene conversion is impaired in thyroidism. So, and actually, there is a iodine scarcity in Tuscany, because at that time you couldn't go to the sea and get the fish in. So that explains it a bit. So that's how doctors look at science, unfortunately. And we wrote A Medical Mystery Resolved. It went viral at that time, but sometimes we leave or get the beauty out of focus here, and I get a little bit lost with that. Okay. So with that, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Brilliant.
So, thank you so much for the very passionate showing of the art of the cardiology. And I think that everybody now checks his own body.
You should.
I'm a little bit scared. So this conversation should be about what art and science fundamentally are, what they have in common, and what the differences are. Well, I started to think about the general definition or general thought, what the two fields have in common. Maybe it's total crap, but I thought both science and art are human attempts to understand and describe the world around us. But in science, to me, it seems pretty clear. You have a goal, you have an idea, and then you do some scientific experiments, and you fail or you don't fail. It's always very empirical. There is an idea of truth. And the first thing I'd like you to talk with each other is this idea of truth. Is there something like truth in art? How do you experiment in your field? Is there something like progress in art? What's exactly what you are doing as compared to what a scientist does?
I think art is the one area of human activity where you can tell lies and you can pretend, and truth is not, in the literal sense, the prime concern. There are all sorts of other ways of manifesting what your reaction is to being alive now. And I think it's, in a way, I think the visual arts have a lot to do with anthropology. They're kind of evidencing how we live now, what we're living now. And I don't think, I think there are a lot of conventions involved that get passed down, conventions about beauty, conventions about the size of an artwork and how you look at it and where artworks are. But I think there are many other ways which I think over the years, over the centuries, have been explored. I mean, it seems extraordinary to me that some of the first images are all in caves, you know, where they're dark. So how did light get into caves? I think there are a lot of sort of very basic questions about what art is to the individual or to the communities that look at art that aren't just about telling a kind of truth about the world around, but they're exaggerations and pretenses and subtle interventions that alert us to the nuances of the life we're leading. And I think that the use of metaphor, it's not just about storytelling, it's about a kind of comparison in the way that a poet might. If a poet can describe the sea, the greyness of, say, the North Sea, as if it's a block of flats, where there's a fantastic poem where I've read that, you can see the extent of the language that is at our disposal as artists, where it's not trying to make it into a truth actually restricts it and probably makes it have all sorts of very literal qualities.
Well, I think fundamentally our motivations, our goals are pretty much the same. I think I understand, at least from artists, that you also want to understand the world through your eyes, and that's somewhat also, you're not just doing it for yourself, but then share it with the world. And that's what a scientist would like to do as well. I want to understand the world a bit. I'm a curious guy. My wife would say I'm still very infantile. I am. Luckily, I am. I was never focused in life, I think. Luckily, I wasn't. I was not. I actually, if my young fellows look at me, Frank, what was your career path? I said was crisscross. And luckily, I covered it. I played around. And then I had learned some methodology, some skills, and with that I played and was lucky enough to every now and then discover something which was meaningful or not.
How did you experiment? How did you... I mean, I'm very interested in the notion of guesswork, of guessing at things, which I think artists have the license to do. Instead of knowing, they can guess, and that's a sort of high-risk activity.
In hindsight, I could tell you I was very focused and I had these brilliant ideas. Actually, most of that was serendipity. And I had some great teachers who taught me to see what other people wouldn't see. And then taught me about the known unknowns or the unknown unknowns, and all of a sudden you see something what other people probably don't see. And then when you publish it, that's what we do, they say, oh, that was easy. Clear, it's obvious. I tell you a story. It's like, maybe it's stupid, but if you're a good clinician and a good scientist, you see connections where other people don't see it. I had a patient in 1998, 2 patients who had a heart transplant and had a rejection. And we said, that's life-threatening. And we had no explanation. They were stable. And all of a sudden, we didn't know. And my friend, Georg, saw a patient next day and the same thing. And we had a coffee, said, what's going on? And we're great friends still. He works at the private hospital now. There are no enemies, so we were very good friends. And we said, why? And you know what happened? They took a herbal medicine against depression. It's called St. John's wort. Yeah. You know it. Listen. And that was one of my few contributions to medicine. And we said, oh, but that's a herbal medicine. That should be okay. But they said, why? And we had no other explanation. Maybe that has something to do with the rejection. And he said, that's funny. My patient also takes that.
Oh, God.
And then we said, what? The hell? And then we looked at the mechanism, and we discovered the mechanism. And then we published that. And The Lancet in London is one of our 2 best journals in the world. They said, yeah, no, we don't want to take that. And then the National Institute of Health, within a couple of months, saw the same thing with HIV patients. Your daughter works in HIV. And these patients with HIV, with AIDS, were so scared and depressed, they said, I don't want to take an antidepressive pill. I take a herbal medicine. But what happened, that St. John's wort is a double-edged sword, because it makes impacts with the metabolization of drugs in the liver. So these drugs don't work anymore. So my transplant patients took cyclosporin that was discovered here in Switzerland. It didn't work anymore, so I had a rejection. The HIV patients, their retroviral drugs, the antiviral medicine didn't work anymore. So they got a relapse of the disease and died. And you know what also? The anticonceptives, the anti-baby pills didn't work. So we explained a lot of unwanted pregnancies. So in the end, it was just 2 patients where we saw a connection, which helped us. And now a lot of people know that St. John's wort and these herbal medicine are very powerful, and they can do actually harm.
Extraordinary.
But now you were talking about the very focused process. You knew there was a problem and you were trying to find out. And I'd like to introduce the notion of randomness. Whereas when I saw your work, or you doing your work, actually in a video of the British Arts Council, there was kind of a sculpture on a table, and then it fell and it broke a little bit, and it looked very random. And you said, well, for me, it's all right now. It's good now. So I want you to talk a little bit about the idea of randomness, research randomness, and producing art and randomness. Maybe Phyllida?
It's very important to me. I like taking risks, and risks for me are doing things badly or not aspiring to do them well in order to see how far that process to go. I'm very interested in height. I'm interested in dimensions as a starting point for the work. So I often make quite temporary structures at the start, and I work with a team of, say, 3 people, and we build these temporary structures. And yes, they do fall down, and things do go wrong. Then it's not dangerous, it's all right, no one's been killed yet. But I mean, it's in a way for me to see where the limit, instead of it being sensible and coherent, and the method being totally reliable and in a way quite ordinary, I want to explore something where it's on the edge of that. And therefore there are accidents, things do fall over, and then a new work emerges out of that, which is almost like an objet trouvé. It's like a found object, it's like starting again. And then I go back to building the structure in a way that is sensible, because I found this limitation. So I'm often working between 2 quite random decisions that have been, in a way, imposed upon the work. And to me, to have that freshness, which I see as very alive, it's almost as if the work is taking over me rather than me it. I like that breakdown in control, which fascinates me about.
So you create by mistake, whereas, I mean,
yes.
You don't make a mistake once I'm your patient.
Well, we actually make a lot of mistakes, but I'm nobody without a team, I tell you, and I have my people around me who prevent me from making mistakes. God bless them, don't make too many, but we all do. And when I look at your work, and I'm not an artist, and I'm just a small boy, but it's extraordinary. But the word extraordinary for me is out of the ordinary, somewhat. You are, when I look at you, you're challenging systems. That's why I tell my people always, challenge us. Good teachers, good professors are the ones who encourage people to speak up, challenge the system, because then we move on, you know. And in that environment we thrive. That is what drives me. I was always a rebel without a cause. Now, luckily, I found a cause, and that's what inspires me.
Is it an adventure for you?
Oh, it's adventure, it's fun. And I still see science as the opportunity to it's like a childish play, somewhat. And I try to discover things that I've not probably even a year before have thought about that.
That interests me because I'm not sure what I'm discovering.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. I regard myself as a very traditional artist, a very traditional sculptor who's used the same materials for the past 50 years. So I don't know what the question is. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what I'm trying to discover. But there's something about the urge to take on things. And often it is... This morning, the curator of the Louise Bourgeois and the show downstairs was talking about the anger and violence of Louise Bourgeois. And I think that those aspects of an artist where they're allowed full reign is very different maybe to, this is a question, where a scientist has to control those, whereas we have the luxury of, in a way, being able to be murderous with materials and in a way to enjoy that aggression, you know. I mean, I'm a woman, but I know I have a ferociously aggressive relationship with materials and making sculpture. You know, it is the female spider, you know, at work. Yes. And I think understanding those emotional qualities of oneself are incredibly important in how to take risks and have this adventure. Is there a similar... You've talked about being childish, and I absolutely sympathize with that. I feel I have the same instincts. But do you think, for you, it's a journey of coming to terms with
I think
yourself?
The greatest risk is taking no risk. You know, you won't get anywhere if you don't take risk. That's the same in medicine. Well, we have to understand differentiate between science when we do experiments. Right. And when we do an operation or an intervention, there I try to avoid mistakes and taking risks, kind of to be on the safe side. But if we want to move the field in science, we have to be adventurous and play with it. And often enough, but we have to be bright enough or knowledgeable enough to connect things that other people don't see.
Yes.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, when often enough we meet at a coffee machine with another and have a coffee, and then all of a sudden serendipity tells us, oh, we talk about something, then we connect, and then we have a project. And some of my best stories started at a coffee machine talking to a scientist who had something totally different on his mind, and together we got on the journey and got somewhere we wanted to go. But yeah, I work with 10, 20 people in the team. I don't publish a paper alone anymore. But you do it alone, don't you?
No. I have a team. The small works are my drawings, of course, I do myself. And the small works are, in a way, the engine of the bigger works.
But with the bigger works, do you have people telling you, well, do it like that?
I tell them.
Right. So that's still a big difference. I mean,
I direct them.
Right.
I take on this director role, especially when we're doing the plaster work or the cement work where we're casting things. I'm actually, it's a team. At the moment, for instance, we're working on a very large work for Los Angeles, and I think I have 8 people, and I have to just patrol it the whole time. It's a very different way of working because I'm quite interested in that collaborative, what you're talking about, I'm actually collaborating with their hands, and if they make mistakes, it sometimes is absolutely fine and other times it isn't, and it's in a way completely irrational because it's very difficult for them to realize when I'm going to say, no, can we take all that material off and start again, because it's not clear to them why that isn't okay, and another person who seems to be doing roughly the same kind of mistake, it is okay. But that's a kind of the sort of arbitrary judgments that I think an artist makes, you know, and trying to then explain that is almost impossible.
We were talking about the difference shortly before this talk between creativity and imagination. So, and it's just an idea that I have. As being a top scientist, you probably need to be. You have to have an imagination in order to decide what kind of experiments you're going to do. Whereas as an artist, creativity is much more important. Or are these the same things? It's a semantical problem. It's very difficult to distinguish them. What exactly is the difference? In which fields do you operate between imagination and creativity?
Well, they're symbiotic, aren't they? Creativity seems to be the action that you apply to imagination. And then the two work together where you begin to have an imaginative relationship with how you are creative. You know, it's why, in a way, that especially in the UK, there was a very sort of moral attitude to making right up until the early 60s, where it was based on good, bad, right, wrong. And you got out of that people like Henry Moore and Barbara Hepworth, who at that time when I was 16, I utterly despised. Now I love their work, but I saw it as very much belonging to this sort of, no, that's the wrong way of making, this is the right way. And I think that was a way in which imagination, in the sort of British sense, was being all tidied up and very connected to craft. But I think after the sort of 60s explosion, both in the USA and in Europe, where all sorts of things started to happen with art, that moral attitude to making went, and the imagination and creativity became interchangeable in some way, and very anarchic against a craft-driven activity. If that makes any sense at all.
Oh, it does. It does. In my group, we have an unbelievably gifted young guy who's actually from China, and he's can do some methodology others of us can't. And we said, play with it. And he took an approach to single-cell sequencing. It's a very sophisticated gene technology. And in every cell of the heart, and they said, just play with it. And we let him do. And then he came back, just actually on Friday, he showed us. And it's not published yet, but it will be a very good paper. And he showed us, well, there are 20% of cells in the heart. We actually don't really know what they do. We said, what? That's interesting. We thought we know that. And said, and you know what? They look like brain cells. And I said, oh, well, maybe we've discovered the soul. But so he played with it. And it's unbelievably sophisticated stuff. So I don't even understand all what he's doing. But he has the creativity to do it, the skills, and play with it. Yes. And we gave him the chance, and it's a collaboration with Beijing where he is, and he's actually at the moment with us. And we said, wow, go on this, and we'll see. And at the same time, we are working between these emotions that trigger certain impact on your heart and can stun it, and said, wow, maybe that is the counterpart that we're always looking for. I can't tell you it leads us to there. It's very early. But the very fact that he showed us something which we were not aware of, because he just simply played with it. It's and that was beautiful. That makes... Now we are very excited about that. But we keep him here now. Don't send him back to Beijing. We said he has to do this now here. But that is the kind of fun we have when we are doing that. Yeah. But it's not very focused sometimes. I didn't have an imagination that we will go there. Often enough, I think there's so much we don't know. That's the beauty about science. There's so much to discover. We know nothing at the moment. We have made huge progress, but we are very well humble enough to know that we have not done enough yet.
But when he's found the brain cells on the heart, which is absolutely extraordinary. So what happens next? Do you form a theory around that, an idea around that,
absolutely,
or how? Because that's very comparable in a different way to the journey of an accident with a piece of sculpture, you know that.
Yeah, we have to unravel all the mechanisms behind that and really characterize that. It's way too early to really say how meaningful this is, but it looks, it looks like almost a paradoxon. So, and that's what the great scientist Bohr said. Wow, we found something which looks like a paradoxon. Now we have a chance to make progress. These are the crossroads where we are sometimes, where we think, exactly there, where everybody says, perplexed, and said, we don't get it. Brain cells in the heart doesn't make sense.
But that was just on one heart. Have you examined other hearts to see whether
we have to
the
replicate
brain cells,
that?
So that brings in repetition, and that
of course
interests me a lot, because I think that's a thing that happens. I think in creativity from a
repetition.
Yes, the idea.
What does it mean in your work concretely?
It means that maybe going back over something again or repeating things because there is no such thing as repetition. You know, it's always different.
Is there something like discovery in your field? Did you discover something, that you do something new that no one else ever did? In art? I'm
not interested in doing something new, actually. It doesn't interest me. I find the obsession with being new and innovative is often a complete dead end, you know. It seems that the journey with that particular work or a series of works is so challenging in itself that the newness is happening without one knowing that it is new. It's new for me, but often things are repetitive in terms of the job that has to be done in making sculpture. So.
One last thing, and then I think we have to stop. We're way over the time. There's kind of an asymmetry in the two fields, whereas I always have the idea that as a scientist you can easily enjoy a work of art. You can listen to Beethoven without knowing how to read the scores or understand a painting or a sculpture, like your wonderful sculptures. But vice versa, it's kind of difficult. It's difficult to appreciate beauty in science if you have no idea. Is that true?
Well, that's a question to you, Phyllida.
For her, it's easier. We just love her work.
Yeah, but without science, I think we all wouldn't be here. We were just made to be 40 years old.
So what is the beauty in science? So what would be the beauty in science?
The beauty in science is that, you unravel mechanism and they make sense at the end. That's for me. If my theory in the end somehow leads me to something substantially meaningful in medicine, and that I bring back to the patient, that is the beauty I see. I don't have an artwork in front of me that I can refer to, but if I have understood something and which finally makes my patient's life better, and even live longer and better with that, that's enormously gratifying. And if I had the pleasure in my life to have contributed on 2-3 parts of this, then I consider myself very lucky. And that is the beauty I see in science, in cardiology or in medicine. Unraveling mechanisms of nature, that is something.
I think it's fantastic.
That's it. Yeah. And that is, I know that you don't like to say that, but you're the descendant of Charles Darwin. So
No, we agreed not to mention it.
I know. but
now we have to stop. Now we have to stop. No, really, we're way over time. I have to say thank you to the two of you. Phyllida Barlow, Frank Ruschitzka. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you also from on behalf of Zurich Art Weekend. Thank you so much, the three of you, for this wonderful talk.